In the brutal heart of ancient Rome, 73 AD, where the roar of the Colosseum drowns out the cries of the dying, lives Marcus Silentius, a gladiator who has never spoken a word since childhood trauma stole his voice. Known as the Silent Death in the arena, Marcus possesses an extraordinary gift. He can fight with deadly precision even while blindfolded, relying on sound instinct and an almost supernatural awareness of his surroundings. But Marcus harbors a secret that would destroy him. If discovered, he is hopelessly in love with Lydia, a young healer who tends to wounded gladiators in the underground chambers beneath the Colosseum. Lydia, daughter of the arena's chief physician, possesses hands blessed by the gods with miraculous healing powers. She can mend broken bones, close fatal wounds, and even bring men back from the brink of death with her gentle touch. However, Lydia sees Marcus only as another broken warrior in need of healing. She doesn't know that every victory he wins, every brutal fight he survives, is fought not for glory or freedom, but for the chance to feel her healing hands upon his wounds, the only touch that brings him peace in a world of violence. When a corrupt Roman senator discovers Lydia's divine gift and schemes to possess her for his own dark purposes, Marcus must make the ultimate choice: reveal his love and risk losing her forever, or sacrifice everything, including his life, to protect the woman who holds his heart, but will never know it. This is a tale of silent devotion, impossible love, and the greatest sacrifice a man can make for a woman who sees him as nothing more than another wounded soul to heal. The roar of 50,000 Romans thundered through the Colosseum like the voice of the gods themselves, but Marcus heard only silence. Not the silence of the deaf, no, his ears caught every whispered prayer, every dying breath, every clash of steel against steel, with perfect clarity. It was the silence of the mute, the cursed quiet that had lived in his throat for 15 years. Ever since the day Roman soldiers burned his village and left him the sole survivor, his voice stolen by smoke and grief. Silent death, silent death, silent death. The crowd's chant echoed off marble walls as Marcus stepped into the blazing sunlight of the arena floor. Sand crunched beneath his bare feet, sand mixed with the blood of yesterday's fallen, tomorrow's dead. The iron gates clanged shut behind him with the finality of a tomb ceiling. Across the arena, 3 condemned criminals waited with crude weapons and desperate eyes. This wasn't meant to be a fair fight. It was meant to be an execution disguised as entertainment. The crowd wanted blood, and Marcus Silentius, gladiator of the Ludus Magnus, property of Gaius Antonius Maximus, was here to provide it. But today was different. Today Marcus fought with a black cloth tied across his eyes. "By Jupiter's beard," gasped Senator Lucius Valerius from his cushioned seat in the Pulvinus. "The barbarian fights blindfolded. Maximus, have you gone mad?" Gaius Antonius Maximus, Marcus's lanista and owner, smiled with the confidence of a man who had never lost a bet. "Watch and learn, Senator. My silent death sees with more than eyes." In the underground chambers beneath the arena, Lydia pressed her face against the iron bars of a viewing grate, her heart hammering against her ribs. Her father, physician Gaius Cornelius, stood beside her, shaking his head in dismay. "Foolishness," the old man muttered. "Even the greatest gladiator cannot fight what he cannot see. We'll be treating his corpse before the sun moves another inch." But Lydia couldn't look away. Something about the silent gladiator had always captivated her. Not romantically, she told herself, but professionally. He was the only fighter who never cried out when she cleaned his wounds, never flinched when she reset broken bones. He endured pain like a statue endures rain, silent and unmoving. She had always wondered what thoughts lived behind those dark eyes that watched her work with such intensity. Now those eyes were hidden behind black silk, and 3 murderers advanced on him with raised swords. Marcus tilted his head slightly, listening. The first attacker moved with heavy, uneven steps, a limp favoring his right leg. The second breathed shallow and quick fear, or perhaps a lung wound. The third was dangerous. He moved like a cat, silent and controlled, a real killer, not just a desperate criminal. The crowd held its breath as the first man charged. Marcus didn't move until the sword was a hair's breadth from his throat. Then he flowed like water, bending backwards as the blade whistled overhead. His own gladius, short, efficient, deadly, punched upward with surgical precision. The attacker's charge became a stumble, then a fall, then stillness. The crowd exploded in cheers, but Marcus was already moving, spinning to face the second attacker, whose fearful breathing had quickened to panic. This one came wild and desperate, hacking and slashing without skill or strategy. Marcus parted each strike with minimal effort, reading the man's intentions in the whistle of displaced air, the scrape of sandaled feet on sand. When the opening came, Marcus took it, swift, clean, merciful. 2 down. Now came the dangerous one. This killer had watched his companions die and learned. He approached slowly, testing Marcus with feints and false attacks. Steel rang against steel as they danced their deadly ballet, each seeking the other's weakness. In the underground chamber, Lydia found herself gripping the bars so tightly her knuckles had gone white. "How does he do it?" she whispered. Her father stroked his beard, medical curiosity overriding his disapproval. "I've heard of such things in the East, blind warriors who learn to fight by sound and touch, but never have I seen it done so perfectly." The final attacker was skilled, but Marcus was something beyond skill. He was instinct made flesh, violence refined to its purest essence. When the killing blow came, it was so fast that even the crowd, bloodthirsty and experienced in death, gasped in amazement. 3 down. Marcus stood alone in the center of the arena, black cloth still across his eyes, not a drop of blood on his bronze skin. He raised his gladius to the emperor's box in salute, then removed his blindfold with slow, deliberate ceremony. The crowd went mad. Silent death, silent death, silent death. Coins and flowers rained from the stands. Women threw silk scarves and jewelry. Men shouted his name until their voices cracked. But Marcus heard none of it. His dark eyes found the viewing grate where Lydia watched, and for one perfect moment, their gazes met. She was beautiful, not in the painted, artificial way of Roman noblewomen, but with the natural grace of someone who lived to heal rather than harm. Her auburn hair caught the light filtering down from above, and her green eyes held a compassion that seemed impossible in this place of death. Marcus wanted to speak, to call out her name, to tell her that every victory was hers, every triumph laid at her feet like an offering to a goddess. But the words died in his ruined throat as they always did, leaving him mute and desperate. Lydia smiled, not at him, he knew, but at his survival. Another gladiator lived to fight another day, another patient for her healing hands. She had no idea that her smile was worth more to him than all the gold in Rome. As the crowd's cheers echoed around him, Marcus allowed himself to be led from the arena by the guards. Soon he would be back in the chambers below, and Lydia would tend to his few minor wounds with her miraculous touch. For those precious moments when her fingers traced his skin, checking for injuries, applying healing salve, he could pretend that her care meant something more than professional duty. It was a beautiful lie, and it was all he had. But in the shadows of the imperial box, Senator Lucius Valerius watched with calculating eyes as the healer girl disappeared back into the depths of the Colosseum. He had heard whispers of her abilities, rumors of miraculous recoveries and impossible healing. If even half the stories were true, Maximus, he called to the Lannister, "That girl who tends your fighters, tell me about her." Maximus glanced toward the viewing grate where Lydia had stood. "Cornelius's daughter. She's gifted, I'll grant you that. Keeps my gladiators fighting longer, healing faster. Worth her weight in gold." "Indeed," Valerius murmured, his mind already spinning schemes. "Worth her weight in gold and perhaps a great deal more." In the underground chambers, as Lydia's gentle hands examined Marcus for injuries he barely felt, neither of them knew that dark forces were already moving to tear their small world apart. The silent death had won another victory, but his greatest battle was yet to come. The underground chambers beneath the Colosseum were a world unto themselves, a maze of stone corridors carved from the living rock, where gladiators waited between battles and healers worked miracles in the shadows. The air was thick with the scent of herbs and healing oils, mixed with the metallic tang of blood and the acrid smoke of torches that flickered against moisture-slicked walls. Marcus sat on a simple wooden bench in the healing chamber, his bronze skin gleaming in the torchlight. Despite his flawless victory above, small cuts marked his arms where his opponent's desperate strikes had found their mark. They were nothing, barely more than scratches, but they were his excuse to be here, in this sacred space where Lydia worked her magic. "You fight like a man possessed," came a gruff voice from the corner. Brutus, a massive Gaul with scars covering half his face, sharpened his gladius with deliberate strokes. "But fighting blind? That's madness, even for you, Silent Death." Marcus turned his dark eyes toward the veteran gladiator, but said nothing. He never said anything. In 5 years of fighting in the same ludus, Brutus had never heard Marcus speak a single word. "The crowds love it, though," continued another voice. This belonged to Cassius, a former Roman legionnaire turned gladiator, after desertion. "Did you hear them, Silent Death? Silent Death, they're calling you the new Spartacus." At the mention of that name, every gladiator in the chamber fell silent. Spartacus, the rebel who had nearly brought Rome to its knees 30 years ago. It was not a comparison to make lightly in these halls. Marcus shook his head slightly, dismissing the notion. He fought for survival, not revolution. He fought for the chance to see her face, to feel her touch. Revolution was for men with nothing left to lose. Marcus still had hope, however foolish it might be. The sound of soft footsteps on stone announced Lydia's arrival before she appeared in the arched doorway. She carried her leather satchel of healing supplies and wore a simple white stola that seemed to glow in the dim torchlight. Her auburn hair was pulled back in a practical braid, and her green eyes surveyed the chamber with the practiced gaze of a healer, assessing her patient. "Cassius, that shoulder needs rebinding," she said, moving with the quiet authority that came from years of tending broken bodies. "The stitches are pulling. Brutus, let me see those knuckles. The swelling hasn't gone down as it should." Then her eyes fell on Marcus, and his heart hammered against his ribs like a caged bird. "And you," she said, approaching with her measured, professional steps. "3 men today, and blindfolded no less. Father says it's the most impressive display he's seen in 20 years. She knelt beside his bench, close enough that he could smell the lavender oil she used to cleanse her hands. "Let me see what damage they managed." Marcus extended his arms, trying to keep his breathing steady as her fingertips traced the minor cuts. Her touch was gentle but thorough, checking each wound with the expertise of someone who had seen every possible injury the arena could inflict. "These are nothing," she murmured, more to herself than to him. "Surface cuts, already beginning to heal on their own. Your body mends itself faster than most." She looked up at him with those remarkable green eyes. "You're fortunate in that." If only she knew, Marcus thought, that his body healed quickly because it was desperate to be whole again for her next examination. That every cut, every bruise, every broken bone was worth it for these moments when she touched him with such focused attention. "Still," Lydia continued, opening her satchel, "we should clean them properly. Infection is always a risk in this place." She withdrew a small clay pot filled with a pale green scythe that smelled of honey and mint. "This might sting a little." Her fingers dipped into the scythe and began to spread it gently over his wounds. The sensation was electric, not from the medicine, but from her touch. Marcus closed his eyes, memorizing the feeling of her skin against his, the way her breath whispered across his arm as she worked, the small furrow of concentration that appeared between her brows. "You know," she said softly, her voice taking on a tone he'd never heard before, almost conversational, as if she was speaking to a friend rather than a patient. "I've always wondered about you." Marcus's eyes snapped open. She was looking at him with genuine curiosity, not just professional interest. "You never speak," she continued, applying salve to a cut on his forearm. "Never cry out when you're hurt, never complain about pain. The other gladiators tell stories, boast of their victories, curse their defeats. But you," she paused, seeming to search for the right words, "you're like a mystery written in a language I can't read." Oh, if only he could tell her. If only the words locked in his throat could break free. He would tell her that he had been silent so long because the first words he wanted to speak were her name, that every victory in the arena was a prayer to whatever gods might listen, a plea for the chance to earn her notice, that he loved her with the fierce, desperate devotion of a man who knew he could never have what he wanted most. Instead, he simply watched her work, his dark eyes drinking in every detail of her face. "The healers in Alexandria speak of gladiators like you," Lydia said, moving to clean a cut on his shoulder. "Warriors who lose themselves so completely in combat that they transcend normal human limitations. They call it the God-touched madness." She glanced at him. "Is that what happens when you fight? Do the gods speak to you?" Marcus wished he could explain that the only divine voice he heard was hers, calling him back from the edge of death whenever her hands found his wounds, that her touch was the only miracle he had ever witnessed. "There," she said, sitting back on her heels, "all clean and treated. The cuts should be healed completely by tomorrow." She began packing her supplies away. "Try to get some rest before your next bout. Father says Maximus has scheduled you to fight twice more this week." As she prepared to leave, Marcus did something he had never done before. He reached out and gently touched her wrist, not to stop her but to get her attention. She looked down at his hand, then up at his face, surprise flickering in her green eyes. Slowly, carefully, Marcus brought his free hand to his chest, over his heart, then gestured toward her. It was a simple sign, one that any Roman would understand: gratitude. "Thank you." But in his eyes she might have read something deeper if she had known how to look, something that spoke of devotion beyond mere gratitude, of a love so profound it had rendered him speechless even before fate stole his voice. Lydia smiled, that same professional, compassionate smile she gave to all her patients. "You're welcome, Marcus. It's what I do." She didn't know his real name was Marcus Aurelius Corvus, that he had been born free in a small village in Gaul before Rome's legions destroyed everything he had ever known. To her, he was simply Marcus the Gladiator, Marcus the Silent Death, another broken warrior in need of healing. As she walked away, her sandals whispering against the stone floor, Marcus watched until she disappeared around the corner. Only then did he allow himself to slump forward, his head in his hands. "She cares for you, you know." Marcus looked up to find Cassius watching him with knowing eyes. "Not the way you want," the former legionnaire continued quietly. "But she does care. I've seen how she looks at you when you're hurt worse than usual. There's something in her eyes, concern beyond duty." Marcus shook his head. Cassius meant well, but he was wrong. Lydia cared for all the gladiators. It was her nature, her calling. There was nothing special about the way she treated him. "You should tell her," Brutus rumbled from his corner. "Life in the arena is short and brutal. If you have feelings for the girl, speak them while you still can. If only it were that simple. If only the words existed that could bridge the chasm between them, between a mute slave who killed for sport and a free-born Roman healer who saved lives with her blessed touch." Marcus stood and walked to the small window that looked out onto the Hypogeum, the vast underground network beneath the arena floor. Through the iron bars he could see torchlight flickering in distant corridors, hear the roar of wild beasts in their cages, smell the sawdust and blood of tomorrow's games. Somewhere above, Senator Valerius was probably still in his cushioned seat, drinking wine and discussing business with other wealthy Romans. The man's calculating stare during today's fight had not gone unnoticed. Marcus had seen that look before, the way a merchant examined expensive goods, weighing cost against value. A chill ran down Marcus's spine. In his silent world he had learned to read faces, gestures, the subtle signs that others miss, and what he had read in Valerius's expression filled him with dread. The senator was planning something that involved Lydia. Marcus pressed his forehead against the cold iron bars, his mind racing. How could he protect her when he couldn't even speak to warn her? How could a mute slave stand against a powerful senator of Rome? But even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, Marcus felt his resolve hardening like steel in a forge. He might be silent, he might be a slave, but he was also the man who had never lost a fight in 5 years of arena combat. He was the silent death, and he would die before he let anyone harm the woman he loved, even if she would never know why. In the healing chamber above, Lydia organized her supplies for the next day's work, unaware that her simple act of tending wounds had set forces in motion that would change all their lives forever. She hummed softly as she worked, a lullaby her mother had sung to her before the fever took her years ago. She had no idea that somewhere in the darkness below, a silent gladiator listened to her voice like a drowning man listening for rescue, or that in the imperial palaces above, a corrupt senator was already planning to possess the gift that flowed through her healing hand. The first move in a deadly game had been made, though none of the players yet realized they were playing for stakes higher than gold or glory. They were playing for love, for freedom, and for life itself. 3 days after the blindfolded victory, Senator Lucius Valerius made his move. The morning sun painted the marble columns of his villa in shades of gold and amber as he reclined on his dining couch, picking at a breakfast of honey cakes and imported wine. Slaves moved silently around him, their bare feet whispering against polished floors, their eyes carefully averted from their master's face. They had learned long ago that catching Valerius's attention was rarely a pleasant experience. "Bring me the physician," Valerius commanded, not bothering to look up from the wax tablet where he was reviewing his financial holdings. "Gaius Cornelius from the Colosseum. I have need of his." Within the hour, Lydia's father stood in the senator's opulent atrium, his weathered hands clasped behind his back. Cornelius was a man who had deigned too much death to be easily impressed by wealth. But even he felt dwarfed by the vast space, with its imported marble statues and frescoed walls depicting the glorious victories of Valerius's ancestors. "Senator," Cornelius said with a respectful bow, "you honor me with this summons. How may I serve?" Valerius rose from his couch with the fluid grace of a predator. He was not a large man, but there was something in his pale blue eyes that suggested dangerous depths, like looking into still water and suddenly realizing it was far deeper than it appeared. "Your daughter," Valerius said without preamble. The healers speak of her abilities in whispers, as if she were touched by the gods themselves. Cornelius stiffened. "Lydia is skilled, yes. She learned much from me, and perhaps she has natural gifts that exceed my own. But she is just a healer, Senator. Nothing more. Nothing more." Valerius smiled, but it was the smile of a snake eyeing a mouse. "Come now, Cornelius. Don't insult my intelligence. I have made inquiries. Gladiators with mortal wounds who fight again within days, broken bones that mend overnight, infections that vanish at her touch." He began to pace, his toga rustling against the marble floor. "Either your daughter is blessed by Asclepius himself, or she has access to healing methods unknown to the greatest physicians in Rome." The old physician chose his words carefully. "The gods bless some with greater gifts than others. My daughter works hard, studies ancient texts, experiments with new treatments." "Experiments?" Valerius pounced on the word like a hawk diving for prey. "What sort of experiments?" Cornelius realized his mistake too late. "Nothing dangerous, Senator. Simply new combinations of herbs, different methods of—" "I want to meet her." The words hung in the air between them like a drawn sword. Cornelius felt his blood turn to ice in his veins. "Senator, my daughter is but a humble healer. She has no place in the circles of Roman nobility." "Surely your own physician." "My own physician," Valerius interrupted, his voice taking on the edge of steel, "could not save my son when the fever took him last winter. The greatest healers in Rome watched helplessly as the boy burned with illness. Yet I'm told your daughter has brought men back from the very threshold of death. He stopped pacing and fixed Cornelius with that predatory stare. I want to see these miraculous healing hands for myself. Cornelius swallowed hard. Of course, Senator. If you wish to visit the medical chambers beneath the Colosseum. No, Valerius waved a dismissive hand. I want her brought here, to my villa. Tonight, Senator, I must protest. My daughter is needed at the games tomorrow. The gladiators depend on her care. The gladiators are property, Valerius snapped. Valuable property, yes, but property nonetheless. Your daughter, however, he smiled that cold smile again. Your daughter may be something far more precious. I suggest you remember which of us holds the power in this relationship, physician. The threat was clear, though unspoken. Cross a senator of Rome, and both father and daughter could find themselves sold into slavery, or worse. Cornelius bowed his head in defeat. As you wish, Senator. I will bring Lydia to you this evening. Excellent. Valerius returned to his couch, already dismissing the old man from his attention. Oh, and Cornelius? Come alone. Just you and the girl. I prefer privacy for such delicate consultations. As Cornelius left the villa, his mind raced with dark possibilities. He had spent his life healing others, but now he felt utterly powerless to protect the person who mattered most to him in all the world. Meanwhile, in the depths beneath the Colosseum, Marcus was fighting a different kind of battle. The training yard echoed with the clash of wooden swords as gladiators prepared for the upcoming games. Sweat dripped from bronze bodies as men pushed themselves to their limits, knowing that tomorrow might bring death in the blood-soaked sand above. But Marcus couldn't concentrate on his practice. His mind kept returning to Senator Valerius's face during the blindfolded fight, that calculating, acquisitive stare that spoke of dark intentions. Every instinct he had developed in 5 years of reading opponents told him that danger was circling Lydia like wolves around a wounded deer. Your head's not in the fight, Brutus observed, parrying Marcus's half-hearted thrust with ease. Whatever's eating at you, forget it. A distracted gladiator is a dead gladiator. Marcus lowered his wooden sword, frustration burning in his chest like acid. How could he explain his fears to Brutus? How could he warn anyone about a threat he couldn't prove, couldn't even speak about? It's the healer girl, isn't it? Cassius approached, having finished his own training. You're worried about something. Marcus nodded grimly. The perceptive ex-legionnaire had always been good at reading between the lines. What kind of worry? Cassius pressed. Specific danger, or just general unease? Marcus struggled to find a way to communicate his concerns. Finally, he knelt in the sand and began to draw with his finger. First, he sketched a rough outline of a man in a toga, clearly a Roman nobleman. Then he drew a smaller figure that could represent Lydia. Between them he drew what looked like reaching hands. A senator? Cassius guessed, studying the crude drawing. Someone wants to take her? Marcus nodded emphatically, then pointed upward toward the arena seats where the wealthy Romans watched the games. Brutus laughed harshly. You think some soft patrician poses a threat? Marcus, you killed 3 men while blindfolded. What could a pampered senator do that would worry you? But Cassius was frowning thoughtfully. Power, he said quietly. Senator doesn't need to be a warrior to be dangerous. He has the power of Rome behind him, legal authority, the ability to simply take what he wants. Marcus pointed at Cassius, then nodded vigorously. The former legionnaire understood. But what can we do? Brutus asked, suddenly serious. We're slaves, property. If a senator wants something, he takes it. That's how Rome works. The hopelessness in the big Gaul's voice echoed Marcus's own despair. What power did a mute gladiator have against the might of the Roman Empire? How could he protect Lydia from forces that could crush him like an insect? But even as these dark thoughts consumed him, Marcus felt the familiar fire of determination kindle in his chest. He had survived the destruction of his village. He had endured years of slavery, brutality, and the constant threat of death. He had become the most feared gladiator in Rome through sheer will and the desperate need to live long enough to be near the woman he loved. He would not surrender now. Standing abruptly, Marcus strode to the weapon rack and selected a real gladius, not the wooden practice sword, but cold steel that could cut through flesh and bone. The other gladiators watched in alarm as he began a training routine unlike anything they had ever seen. Moving with fluid, deadly grace, Marcus fought invisible opponents with the blindfold across his eyes. But this wasn't the careful, measured combat of arena performance. This was something primal and savage, a display of lethal skill that made even hardened killers step back in awe. He fought with the desperation of a man who knew that everything he cared about was slipping away, with the fury of someone who had been silent too long and could only speak through violence. Every cut and thrust was a promise, every defensive move a vow. He would protect her, no matter the cost. When he finally stopped, chest heaving and sweat streaming down his body, the entire training yard had fallen silent. Even the guards had stopped to watch this incredible display of martial prowess. "By the gods," whispered one of the younger gladiators. "He's not human. He's something else entirely." Marcus removed his blindfold and looked at his fellow fighters. In his dark eyes, they saw something that chilled them, not the controlled aggression of a professional killer, but the absolute implacable resolve of a man who had found something worth dying for, and perhaps more frightening still, something worth killing for. That evening, as the sun set behind the 7 hills of Rome, Cornelius led his daughter through the marble halls of Senator Valerius's villa. Lydia walked beside her father in confused silence, still not understanding why they had been summoned to this place of luxury and power. "Father," she whispered as they followed a slave through corridors lined with priceless artwork, "why does the senator want to see me? I'm nobody special." Cornelius squeezed her hand gently. "Just be yourself, daughter. Answer his questions honestly, but be careful. Powerful men often want things that aren't good for those around them." They were led into a small chamber lit by oil lamps, where Valerius waited with the patience of a spider sensing vibrations in its web. He had changed from his formal toga into a simpler tunic, but somehow this made him seem more dangerous, rather than less, like a predator who had shed his disguise to reveal his true nature. "Ah, the miraculous healer," Valerius said, rising to greet them. "Come, child. Let me look at you." Lydia stepped forward uncertainly, acutely aware that she was in the presence of one of Rome's most powerful men. Her simple stola and practical sandals seemed shabby in this opulent setting. "You're younger than I expected," Valerius observed, circling her slowly like a buyer examining a slave at market. "And quite beautiful. The gods have been generous with their gifts." Senator, Cornelius began nervously. "My daughter is honored by your attention." But silence. Valerius didn't raise his voice, but the command carried absolute authority. He continued his examination of Lydia, noting the calluses on her hands from years of grinding herbs, the small scars from needle pricks and knife cuts that came from a healer's work. "These hands," he murmured, taking one of Lydia's hands in his own. His skin was soft and cool like marble. "Show me what they can do." "I don't understand, Senator," Lydia said, trying to keep her voice steady despite the growing fear in her chest. Valerius smiled and gestured to a corner of the room where a cage sat covered by a silk cloth. With a flourish, he pulled away the covering to reveal a small bird, a sparrow with one wing bent at an unnatural angle. "My cat caught this little creature this morning," Valerius explained, conversationally. "Broke its wing quite thoroughly. By all rights it should be dead by now." He looked at Lydia with those pale, predatory eyes. "Heal it." "Senator, I'm not a veterinarian. I heal people, not heal it," he repeated, and this time there was no mistaking the threat in his voice. "Show me these miraculous powers I've heard so much about." Lydia looked helplessly at her father, who could only nod encouragingly. With trembling hands, she opened the cage and carefully lifted the injured sparrow. The tiny creature was barely breathing, its bright black eyes dulled with pain. Lydia sat cross-legged on the marble floor, the wounded bird cupped gently in her palms. She closed her green eyes and began to breathe deeply, slowly, entering the meditative state her mother had taught her years ago. What happened next would have been impossible to explain to any physician in Rome. A soft golden light seemed to emanate from Lydia's hands, not bright enough to illuminate the room, but visible nonetheless. The sparrow stirred in her palms, chirping weakly. As the light pulsed gently, the broken wing began to straighten, the bent bones realigning themselves with soft clicking sounds. Valerius leaned forward, his eyes wide with fascination and greed. This was beyond anything he had imagined, not just skilled healing, but something that bordered on divine power. After several minutes, Lydia opened her eyes. The sparrow in her hands was whole and healthy, its wing fully healed. With a grateful chirp, it flew from her palms to perch on the window ledge. Remarkable, Valerius breathed. Truly remarkable. He looked at Lydia with new respect and new hunger. My dear child, do you have any idea what you are? Lydia shook her head, suddenly exhausted. The healing had drained her more than usual. Perhaps because she was tired, or perhaps because she was afraid. You are a gift from the gods themselves, Valerius said softly. A treasure beyond price. He turned to Cornelius. I'm keeping her, Senator. You cannot. Cornelius stepped protectively in front of his daughter. She's a free-born Roman citizen, not a slave to be bought and sold. Isn't she? Valerius smiled coldly. Let me tell you what I know about your family, physician. Your citizenship papers are questionable. Your grandfather was a Greek slave who bought his freedom, but there are irregularities in the documentation. With the right pressure in the right places, I could have both of you declared slaves before the sun rises tomorrow. The blood drained from Cornelius's face. It was true their citizenship, while legally valid, rested on foundations that could be challenged by someone with sufficient wealth and influence. However, Valerius continued, I am not an unreasonable man. Your daughter will remain here as my personal healer. In exchange, you will continue your work at the Colosseum with a substantial increase in payment. She will be well cared for, I assure you, fed the finest foods, dressed in silk, given every luxury. His voice dropped to a whisper. She will simply never leave. No, Lydia said, finding her voice at last. I won't do it. You can't force me to, can't I? Valerius gestured, and armed guards stepped from the shadows where they had been waiting. Your father's life depends on your cooperation, child. Refuse me, and he dies tonight. Accept my generous offer, and he lives to see many more years. Father and daughter looked at each other across the lamplight, both understanding that they were trapped in a web far stronger than either of them could break. But neither of them knew that in the depths beneath the Colosseum, a silent gladiator was preparing to tear that web apart with his bare hands or die in the attempt. The senator's game had begun in earnest, but Marcus Silentius had never lost a fight that truly mattered, and this one mattered more than life itself. Dawn broke over the Colosseum with the promise of blood and spectacle, but in the underground chambers, a terrible emptiness had settled like a plague. Marcus knew something was wrong the moment he entered the healing chamber. The air felt different, lifeless, cold, missing the subtle warmth that always seemed to emanate from Lydia's presence. The usual organized chaos of medical supplies was absent, replaced by an unnatural tidiness that spoke of abandon. She didn't come back last night, Brutus said quietly from behind him. The big Gaul's scarred face was grim with concern. Old Cornelius neither. Word is they were summoned to some patrician's house yesterday evening. Marcus spun around, his dark eyes wide with alarm. He grabbed Brutus by the shoulders, shaking him urgently, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to force words that would never come. Easy, friend, Cassius said, approaching with the measured calm of an experienced soldier, reading a dangerous situation. "We don't know anything for certain yet. Maybe the old man took ill, needed her care through the night." But Marcus was already moving, striding toward the corridor that led to Cornelius's small private chambers. The other gladiators followed, their footsteps echoing ominously in the stone passages. The physicians' quarters were as empty as the healing chamber. Worse, they showed signs of hasty packing, clothes missing from the wooden chest, personal effects gathered in haste. On the small table where Cornelius usually prepared his medicines, a single wax tablet lay forgotten. Marcus seized it, his hands trembling as he tried to decipher the hastily scratched Latin word. His reading was limited. Gladiator schools didn't waste time on extensive education, but he could make out enough to understand. Senator Lucius Valerius. Consultation, tonight. The tablet slipped from his nerveless fingers and clattered to the floor. "What does it say?" Brutus demanded. But Marcus was already backing toward the door, his face a mask of horror and rage. Cassius picked up the tablet, his literacy better than most gladiators. As he read, his expression grew increasingly dark. "It's a summons," he said slowly, "from Senator Valerius, requesting Cornelius and his daughter for a private medical consultation." He looked up at Marcus, understanding dawning in his eyes. "This is what you were worried about, isn't it? This senator, he's taken the—" Marcus pressed his back against the cold stone wall, his chest heaving as if he'd run a dozen miles. The woman he loved, the only light in his dark world, was in the hands of the predator he'd sensed circling, and he, a mute slave with no legal rights, no political power, no voice to cry for justice, was powerless to help her. But even as despair threatened to drown him, another emotion rose from the depths of his soul. It was the same cold fury that had carried him through his first arena fight, the implacable will that had kept him alive through 5 years of combat, the savage determination that had made him the most feared gladiator in Rome. He would not let her suffer alone. "Marcus," Cassius said carefully, recognizing the dangerous look in his friend's eyes, "whatever you're thinking, stop, think clearly. A senator of Rome isn't some arena opponent you can challenge to single combat. He has guards, legal authority, the power of the state behind him." Marcus shook his head violently, then began moving toward the weapons storage. His intent was clear. He was going after Lydia, regardless of the impossibility of success. "You'll die before you reach his villa's gates," Brutus said bluntly, "and your death won't help the girl. It'll just leave her completely alone." Marcus paused, his hand on a real gladius, not the blunted training weapons, but battle-sharp steel. The big Gaul was right. A frontal assault on a senator's villa would be suicide, but doing nothing was unthinkable. "Wait," Cassius said suddenly, his tactical mind working through possibilities. "Marcus, what if there was another way? What if we could get you inside the villa legally?" Marcus turned, hope flickering in his eyes despite himself. "Think about it," the former legionnaire continued. "Valerius wants to keep the girl for her healing abilities, yes. But what happens if she refuses to cooperate? What if she becomes difficult?" Brutus caught on immediately. He'd need leverage, something to make her comply. "Or someone," Cassius said meaningfully, looking at Marcus. "What better way to ensure a healer's cooperation than to threaten the life of someone she cares about? And what would be more entertaining for a jaded patrician than owning the most famous gladiator in Rome?" The plan that formed between them was desperate, dangerous, and probably doomed to failure. But it was the only chance they had. Within the hour, Cassius was making his way through the morning crowds toward the villa of Senator Valerius, carrying with him a proposition that would either save Lydia or doom them all. Meanwhile, in the luxurious prison of Valerius's villa, Lydia sat in a chamber that would have been paradise for anyone else. Silk cushions surrounded her, fresh fruits and delicacies lay untouched on silver platters, and soft music drifted from an adjacent room where skilled musicians played for her pleasure. She had never been more miserable in her life. The golden cage was still a cage, no matter how beautiful the bars. She had been dressed in expensive stolo of deep blue silk, her hair arranged by skilled slave girls, jewels placed around her throat and wrist. She looked like a patrician lady, but she felt like a captive animal prepared for display. "You haven't touched your food," Valerius observed as he entered the chamber. He had shed all pretense of courtesy now that she was his prisoner. His pale eyes examined her with the satisfaction of a collector viewing a prized acquisition. "I want to go home," Lydia said quietly, not looking at him. "I want to see my father." "Your father is fine," Valerius replied dismissive. "He's continuing his work at the Colosseum under my protection. As for going home," he smiled coldly, "this is your home now. The sooner you accept that, the happier you'll be. And if I refuse to use my abilities for you, if I refuse to heal whoever you command me to heal," Valerius's smile widened, "then your father dies, slowly and painfully. Perhaps I'll have him thrown to the lions in the arena, or crucified along the Appian Way. There are so many interesting possibilities." Lydia closed her eyes, feeling trapped in a nightmare with no escape. "What do you want from me?" "Everything," Valerius said simply. "Your gift, your knowledge, your complete obedience. I have enemies who would pay handsomely to have their illnesses cured, allies who would be grateful for miraculous healing. You are going to make me the most powerful man in Rome, and if my powers fail, if I can't heal someone important to you, then you had better hope they don't," Valerius replied with chilling calm. "Because your value to me is entirely dependent on your usefulness. Disappoint me too often, and you may find yourself wishing for the simple mercy of death." As the senator left her alone again, Lydia pressed her face into the silk cushions and allowed herself to weep. She thought of her father, forced to continue his work under the shadow of death. She thought of the gladiators who would need her healing touch after today's games, men who had come to depend on her care, who might die without it. Most unexpectedly, she found herself thinking of Marcus, the silent gladiator who fought with such incredible skill, who endured pain without complaint, who watched her work with those intense dark eyes that seemed to hold secrets she couldn't read. There had been something different about him, something that set him apart from the other fighters. She had told herself it was merely professional curiosity, but now, in her despair, she admitted the truth. She would miss him, miss the way he never complained, never demanded, never took her presence for granted, the way others did. She wondered if he would even notice she was gone. Outside the villa, Cassius approached the main gate with the confident stride of a man on official business. The guards, hardened veterans who had served in the legions before taking lucrative private employment, examined him with professional skepticism. "State your business," the captain demanded. "I represent Gaius Antonius Maximus, Lanista of the Ludus Magnus," Cassius replied, producing a hastily forged document. "I have a proposition for Senator Valerius regarding his newest acquisition." The guards exchanged glances. Word of the senator's mysterious guest had already spread through the household, as such things always did. "Wait here," the captain commanded. Disappearing into the villa, Cassius waited, his heart hammering against his ribs. Everything depended on Valerius's greed and curiosity, overcoming his caution. If the senator refused to see him, if the plan failed at this first hurdle, Marcus would attempt his suicidal assault on the villa and die pointlessly. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the captain returned. "The senator will see you," he said, "but you will be searched, and guards will remain with you at all times." "Of course," Cassius replied, allowing himself to be thoroughly searched for weapons. "The senator is wise to be cautious." He was led through marble corridors that spoke of wealth beyond imagining, past frescoes and statues that would have fed a dozen families for years. Finally, he was brought to a reception chamber where Valerius waited, reclining on a couch while slave girls fed him grapes and fanned him with ostrich feathers. "So," the senator said without preamble, "you represent the Lanista who owns the Silent Death. What proposition could you possibly have for me?" Cassius bowed respectfully, then straightened to meet Valerius's calculating gaze. "My master has heard of your interest in the healer girl. He also knows that such a valuable asset requires proper protection and leverage to ensure cooperation. Continue. Valerius said, his interest clearly piqued. The Silent Death has an unusual attachment to the girl. Cassius lied smoothly. She has healed him many times, and he has developed feelings for her. Feelings that could be useful to someone seeking to control her behavior. This was the dangerous part. If Valerius didn't believe the lie, or if he sensed the trap. But greed won out over suspicion, as Cassius had hoped it would. "You're suggesting I purchase this gladiator?" Valerius asked. "I'm suggesting a business arrangement that would benefit us both," Cassius replied. "You gain additional security for your villa, a guarantee of the girl's cooperation, and ownership of the most famous gladiator in Rome. My master gains a substantial profit, and the gratitude of a powerful senator." Valerius was quiet for a long moment, considering. Finally, he smiled. "Bring him to me," he said. "Tonight. If he's half as impressive as his reputation suggests, we have a deal." As Cassius was escorted from the villa, he allowed himself a small smile of triumph. The first part of their desperate plan had succeeded. Now came the truly impossible part. Somehow getting Marcus inside the villa, close enough to Lydia to attempt a rescue, without getting them all killed in the process. But Marcus had been preparing for this his entire adult life, even if he hadn't known it. Every fight, every victory, every moment of silent suffering had been leading to this. The chance to prove that love could triumph over power, that a mute slave could stand against the might of Rome itself. Tonight the Silent Death would fight his greatest battle, and for the first time in his career, it would be a fight he couldn't afford to win. He could only afford to survive long enough to save the woman who held his heart. The game of life and death was entering its final phase, and all the players were moving into position. The moon hung like a silver coin in the Roman sky as Marcus was led through the torchlit streets toward Senator Valerius's villa. Heavy chains bound his wrists, not because he was considered dangerous, but because appearances had to be maintained. A gladiator being sold was expected to arrive in shackles. But these particular chains had been carefully weakened by Brutus's hammer in the forge beneath the Colosseum. A single sharp twist would snap them. "Remember," Cassius whispered, as they approached the villa's imposing gates, "you're being sold as both protection and leverage. Act the part of a sullen slave until you find the girl." Then, he didn't finish the sentence. They both knew what came next. Marcus nodded grimly, his dark eyes fixed on the marble walls that held his heart captive. Beneath his coarse gladiator's tunic, he carried no visible weapons, but hidden in the seams were thin strips of sharpened metal, and his body itself had been honed into a weapon more deadly than any blade. The villa's guards examined the documents Cassius presented, while holding torches close to Marcus's face. He submitted to their scrutiny with the blank expression of a broken slave, but inside, every nerve was coiled like a striking serpent. "The Silent Death," one guard muttered in amazement. "I saw him fight last month. Killed 5 men without taking a scratch." "Well, he belongs to the senator now," the captain replied. "Take him to the holding cell until morning. The master will want to inspect his new property when he's fresh." As Marcus was led deeper into the villa, his keen senses mapped every corridor, every guard position, every possible escape route. The place was a fortress disguised as a palace, beautiful, but designed to keep intruders out and prisoners in. They descended stone steps into the villa's lower levels, where slave quarters and storage rooms had been carved from the living rock. It reminded Marcus painfully of the chambers beneath the Colosseum, except here the air carried no scent of healing herbs or the gentle sound of Lydia's voice. The cell they thrust him into was small but not uncomfortable: stone walls, a simple cot, a barred window high up near the ceiling. As the guard's footsteps faded away, Marcus tested his chains. They snapped with a soft metallic whisper. Now came the hardest part: waiting. 3 floors above, Lydia sat by her window looking out at the same moon, her heart heavy with despair. She had refused the elaborate dinner Valerius had sent, just as she had refused every meal since her arrival. Let him threaten her father, she would not make this easy for her captor. "You're being foolish," came Valerius's voice from the doorway. She didn't turn to look at him. "Starving yourself serves no purpose except to weaken your healing abilities." "Good," Lydia said quietly. "Perhaps if I'm weak enough, I'll be useless to you." She heard his footsteps cross the marble floor, felt his presence beside her chair. When he spoke, his voice carried a note of genuine curiosity. "Do you know what fascinates me most about you, girl? It's not your healing gift, remarkable as that is. It's your spirit. Most people would have submitted by now, accepted their fate. But you," he chuckled softly, "you remind me of someone I once knew." Despite herself, Lydia turned to look at him. In the moonlight, his face seemed less predatory, almost melancholy. "My son," Valerius continued, "before the fever took him, he had your same stubborn refusal to accept defeat, even when the situation was hopeless." His pale eyes fixed on hers. "That spirit died with him. I thought I'd never see it again." "Then you should understand I can't simply submit to you," Lydia said. "Some things are worth fighting for, even when the fight seems hopeless." "Perhaps," Valerius mused. "But I wonder, would your resolve remain so strong if the stakes were higher? If more than just your father's life hung in the balance?" Before Lydia could ask what he meant, a commotion erupted from the villa's main courtyard. Shouts of guards, the clatter of weapons, sounds of struggle echoing off marble walls. Valerius frowned and moved to the window. In the courtyard below, torches illuminated a scene of chaos. A figure in dark clothing moved among the guards, like a shadow made flesh, striking with lethal precision. Bodies fell around him as he fought his way toward the villa's main entrance. "Impossible," Valerius breathed. "How did an assassin penetrate my security?" But Lydia had recognized something in the intruder's fluid movements, the deadly grace that needed no sight to guide it. Her heart began to race with a wild hope she barely dared acknowledge. "That's no assassin," she whispered. "That's Marcus." Valerius spun to stare at her. "The Gladiator, but he's locked in the holding cells." His eyes widened with sudden understanding. "You know him, truly know him." Before Lydia could respond, Valerius was shouting for his guards, demanding they secure the villa's upper levels. But even as armed men rushed to obey his commands, both he and Lydia could hear the sounds of combat drawing closer. In the courtyard below, the figure they thought was Marcus continued his devastating assault on the villa's defenses. But this warrior was not Marcus Silentius. It was Brutus, dressed in Marcus's armor and fighting with a fury born of friendship and desperation. The real Marcus had waited until the big Gaul's diversionary attack drew every guard away from the lower levels, then slipped from his cell like a ghost. While Valerius's men fought a phantom in the courtyard, the true silent death moved through the villa's corridors with the stealth of a hunting cat. He found the servants' stairs and began his ascent, following instincts honed by 5 years of reading his opponent's intention. Lydia was above, he could feel it in his bones, the same inexplicable awareness that let him fight blindfolded. On the 3rd floor he encountered his first real obstacle. 2 guards posted outside what could only be Valerius's private chambers. Marcus approached them from behind, moving with such silence that neither man sensed his presence until it was too late. He didn't kill them, these were just soldiers doing their duty, not the true enemy. Instead, he struck with precise force at the pressure points Cassius had taught him, dropping both men into unconsciousness that would last for hours. The door to Valerius's chambers was solid oak bound with iron, but Marcus had spent years learning to find weakness in any defense. A few moments of careful examination revealed the hinges, Roman engineering at its finest, but still vulnerable to someone who understood leverage and force. The door opened with barely a whisper of sound. Inside, Valerius held a dagger to Lydia's throat while peering out the window at Brutus's continued assault on his guards. The senator's face was a mask of cold fury. His perfect trap was collapsing around him, and he was not a man who accepted defeat gracefully. "I should have known," he snarled as Marcus stepped into the moonlit chamber. The legendary silent death. Your reputation for getting out of impossible situations is well deserved. Marcus said nothing, but his dark eyes burned with an intensity that made even Valerius step back slightly. The gladiator's gaze moved to Lydia, checking her for injuries with the thoroughness of a man who had memorized every detail of her face. She was unhurt but terrified, the dagger's blade pressed against the delicate skin of her throat. When their eyes met, Marcus saw something there that stopped his heart, not just fear for her own life, but concern for his. She cared what happened to him. One more step and she dies, Valerius warned, his voice steady despite the chaos erupting around his villa. I may not be able to keep her as my personal healer, but I'll be damned if I let her leave with you. Marcus froze, every muscle coiled for action but held in check by the blade at Lydia's throat. This was the moment he had dreaded, when his love for her became a weakness his enemy could exploit. You want to save her, Valerius continued, pressing his advantage. Then you'll do exactly as I say. Drop to your knees, Gladiator. Submit to me as you would in the arena, and I might let her live long enough to heal the wounds I'm about to give you. Marcus looked into Lydia's eyes and saw her lips move silently, forming a single word, no. She was telling him not to surrender, not to sacrifice himself for her sake, but how could he do anything else? Slowly, his eyes never leaving Lydia's face, Marcus began to lower himself to his knees, and then Lydia did something that changed everything. With a sudden twist that took Valerius by surprise, she broke free from his grip, spinning away from the dagger just as Marcus exploded into motion. The senator had made a fatal error. He had underestimated the courage of the woman he thought was his helpless captive. Marcus crossed the chamber in a single bound, his hand closing around Valerius's wrist before the senator could redirect his blade. The dagger clattered to the marble floor as Marcus lifted the pale, soft-skinned politician like a child, lifting a doll. For a moment their faces were inches apart, and Valerius saw his own death reflected in the gladiator's dark eyes, but Marcus did not kill him. Instead, he threw Valerius across the chamber, where the senator crashed into a table laden with precious objects and lay still, either unconscious or too stunned to move. Marcus, Lydia breathed, and hearing his name on her lips was like hearing music after years of silence. Why did you? He turned to her, and for one perfect moment, the truth blazed in his eyes like fire. She saw it all, the desperate love, the silent devotion, the years of watching her from afar and treasuring every moment she spent healing his wounds. She saw that every victory in the arena had been won for her, every risk taken in the hope of earning her notice. You came for me, she whispered, understanding flooding her voice. You risked everything to save me. Marcus nodded, then gestured urgently toward the window. The sounds of battle were fading in the courtyard below. Either Brutus had escaped or been captured, and soon every guard in the villa would be searching for the real infiltrator. They had to leave, now. But as they moved toward the chamber's door, Valerius stirred from his stunned stupor, his pale eyes fixed on Marcus with hatred that burned like acid. You think you've won? He gasped, blood trickling from his split lip. You think you can simply walk away from this? I am a senator of Rome. I have the power to destroy you both. Marcus paused in the doorway, looking back at the man who had tried to cage the woman he loved. For a moment Valerius thought he saw death approaching on silent feet. But instead of violence, Marcus did something unexpected. He reached into the folds of his tunic and withdrew a small object, a piece of parchment sealed with wax. He tossed it to land at Valerius's feet. The senator picked it up with trembling fingers, broke the seal and read. As his eyes moved across the words, his face went white with terror. It was a detailed record of his illegal dealings, bribes taken, laws broken, citizens sold into slavery on false charges, evidence that would not only destroy his career, but likely cost him his life. Where did you get this? Valerius whispered, but Marcus and Lydia were already gone. vanishing into the villa's shadowy corridors like ghosts seeking freedom. Behind them, the most powerful senator in Rome sat among his broken treasures, holding proof of his own destruction and finally understanding that he had lost far more than a captive healer. He had lost everything. The silent death had spoken at last, not with words, but with actions that would echo through the marble halls of power for years to come. And in the darkness of the villa's corridors, as they fled toward an uncertain freedom, Lydia reached out and took Marcus's hand. Her touch was gentle, warm, and for the first time in his memory, freely given. It was worth more than all the gold in Rome. The pre-dawn darkness cloaked Rome like a shroud, as Marcus and Lydia fled through the twisting streets, her hands still clasped in his, their footsteps echoing off the ancient stones. Behind them, the senator's villa blazed with torchlight as guards searched frantically for their escaped quarry. But ahead lay only uncertainty. They couldn't return to the Colosseum. Valerius would send soldiers there within hours. They couldn't hide in the city. Rome had 1,000 eyes, and the senator's gold would buy information from any of them. Their only hope lay in reaching the harbor before dawn, finding passage on some merchant vessel bound for distant land. But as they hurried through the narrow alleyways of the Suburra, Lydia stumbled, her strength finally failing after days without food. Marcus caught her before she could fall, his strong arms supporting her trembling form. "I can't," she whispered, her voice breaking with exhaustion. "I'm too weak. You should leave me and save yourself." Marcus shook his head fiercely, lifting her as easily as he might carry a child. His dark eyes blazed with determination that spoke louder than any words. He would die before he abandoned her. They took shelter in the ruins, used an old temple, its broken columns offering concealment from the patrols that were surely already searching for them. In the pale light filtering through the shattered roof, Lydia looked up at the man who had risked everything to save her. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why did you come for me? You could have lived safely, fought in the arena, earned your freedom. Eventually, why throw it all away for someone who barely knew you existed?" Marcus set her down gently among the fallen stones, then knelt beside her. For a long moment, he struggled with the words that had been locked in his throat for so many years. Finally, he touched his chest over his heart, then reached out to touch hers with infinite gentleness. "You love me," she breathed, understanding flooding her voice. "All this time you've loved me, and I never knew." Marcus nodded, his eyes bright with unshed tears. He had dreamed of this moment, when she would finally understand the truth that had driven him through years of silent devotion, but he had never imagined it would come at such a cost. "I'm so blind," Lydia whispered, her own tears beginning to tow. "I thought I was just another healer to you, another person who patched your wounds and sent you back to fight. But every time you looked at me," she reached up to touch his face with wonder, "how did I not see it? The way you endured pain without complaint, the way you watched me work, the gratitude in your eyes that seemed too deep for simple medical care." Marcus leaned into her touch, his eyes closing as he finally felt the gentle caress he had dreamed of for so long. Her fingers traced the scars on his face, marks left by years of brutal combat, each one a reminder of the price he had paid for the chance to be near her. "I care for you too," she said suddenly, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I told myself it was professional interest, but it was more. You were different from the other gladiators, noble somehow, silent but never broken. I looked forward to seeing you, to tending your wounds, and when you weren't there," she laughed shakily through her tears, "I convinced myself I was just concerned about a patient's welfare." Marcus opened his eyes, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. After years of hopeless love, after accepting that she would never see him as more than another wounded fighter, could it be that she actually cared for him? "I think I've been falling in love with you without realizing it," Lydia confessed, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I'm such a fool for not seeing it sooner." Marcus's hand covered hers where it rested against his cheek, and for a moment the world outside ceased to exist. There were no pursuing guards, no angry senator, no certain death waiting for them in the growing light. There was only this perfect moment when two hearts finally recognized their match in each other. But the moment shattered as the sound of marching feet echoed from the street outside their hiding place. Torchlight flickered between the broken columns as a patrol approached, searching every shadow and ruin. There came a harsh voice. Movement in the old temple surround it. Don't let them escape again. Marcus rose swiftly, placing himself between Lydia and the approaching soldiers. His hand moved to the hidden blade in his tunic, but they both knew he couldn't fight a full patrol and protect her at the same time. Marcus Silentius. The voice that rang out was cultured, educated, not a common soldier but an officer. By order of Senator Lucius Valerius and the authority of the Roman Senate, you are commanded to surrender yourself and the woman. Marcus's jaw tightened. So Valerius had moved quickly, using his political connections to make this an official matter of state. Now they faced not just hired guards, but Roman legionnaires, and the penalty for killing them would be death for every gladiator in the ludus. You are surrounded, the officer continued. There is no escape. Surrender now, and the woman will be treated with mercy. Lydia struggled to her feet, her hand finding Marcus's arm. Don't, she whispered, don't surrender because of me. I won't be the reason you die. But Marcus was already moving, stepping toward the temple entrance with his hands raised. He would not let her suffer for his love. Better to face whatever punishment awaited than to see her harmed because of his actions. No, Lydia cried, grabbing his arm. I won't let you sacrifice yourself for me. Marcus turned to her, and in his eyes she saw the depths of his love, a devotion so complete that her safety mattered more to him than his own life. He touched her face one last time, memorizing the feel of her skin, then gently removed her hands from his arm. Wait, she said desperately. There has to be another way. My healing, surely that has value to someone. We could bargain. But Marcus was already walking toward the temple entrance, toward the circle of spear points and torches that waited for him. Each step took him further from the woman he loved, and closer to whatever fate Valerius had prepared. There he is, the officer called as Marcus emerged from the shadows. The silent death himself. You've led us quite a chase, Gladiator. Marcus said nothing, standing straight and proud despite his chains of love and honor. Behind him, Lydia appeared in the temple entrance, her face streaked with tears, but her chin raised defiantly. I am Lydia, daughter of Gaius Cornelius, she announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent years commanding respect in life and death situations. I surrender myself freely, but this man has done nothing wrong. He acted only to protect someone he cared about. The officer, a young tribune with intelligent eyes, looked between them with something like sympathy. I'm afraid that's not how Senator Valerius sees it. You're both to be returned to his custody immediately. And if we refuse, Lydia asked. The tribune's expression grew grim. Then you'll be taken by force, and the gladiator will face crucifixion for assaulting a senator and destroying private property. It was checkmate. Valerius had used his power to ensure that any resistance would only make their suffering worse. Marcus's shoulders sagged slightly as he realized the trap they were caught in. But then Lydia did something that surprised everyone, including herself. She stepped forward, placing herself beside Marcus, and took his hand in both of hers. When she spoke, her voice rang with quiet determination. Tribune, she said, I won't make you an offer. The young officer frowned. You're in no position to bargain. Aren't I? Lydia smiled sadly. Senator Valerius wants me for my healing abilities. But those abilities require more than just technique. They require willingness, peace of mind, the desire to heal rather than harm. Does he think he can force me to use them? You would refuse to heal when commanded. I would find it difficult to perform miracles while watching the man I love suffer for protecting me. Her grip on Marcus's hand tightened. My powers work best when I'm at peace. Cruelty and injustice tend to interfere with the process. The tribune was quiet for a moment, understanding dawning in his eyes. He had seen enough of politics to recognize a bargaining position when he heard one. "What do you propose?" Lydia took a deep breath, knowing that what she was about to say would change both their lives forever. "I will return with you willingly. I will serve as the senator's healer. Use my abilities as he commands. Cause no trouble, but only if Marcus goes free. Completely free, not back to the gladiator schools, not sold to another master, but given his legal freedom and allowed to leave Rome unharmed." "Lydia!" "No," Marcus said, the first words anyone had heard him speak in 15 years. The sound of his voice, rusty with disuse but filled with anguish, sent shockwaves through the assembled soldiers. Even the tribune stepped back in amazement. "You can speak," Lydia whispered, tears streaming down her face. "All this time you could speak." Marcus nodded painfully. "That the words only come when the pain is too great to bear in silence." His voice cracked with emotion. "I cannot let you sacrifice yourself for me, and I cannot let you die for loving me," Lydia replied, her own voice breaking. She turned back to the tribune. "Do we have an agreement?" The young officer looked uncertain. "I would need to discuss this with Senator Valerius." "Then discuss it," Lydia said firmly. "But know this, if you take us both back as prisoners, you'll be delivering a healer whose powers may fail at the worst possible moment. A healer consumed by grief and anger is no healer at all." As dawn broke over the eternal city, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, the tribune sent word back to Valerius's villa. The reply came within the hour. The senator would accept the bargain, but with one addition: Marcus would be given his freedom and safe passage from Rome, but he would be branded a criminal and exile. If he ever returned to the city or made any attempt to contact Lydia, both of them would be executed immediately. It was a cruel mercy, life and freedom, but only at the cost of permanent separation from the woman he loved. "Accept it," Lydia urged, when the terms were presented. "Please, Marcus, live free, even if it means living without me. That's all I want, to know that you're alive, and free somewhere in this world." Marcus looked into her green eyes, seeing the desperate love there, the willingness to sacrifice her own happiness for his safety. How could he refuse such a gift, even as it broke his heart? "I will find a way," he said softly, his voice growing stronger with each word. "Somehow, someday I will find a way back to you. Promise me you'll live," she whispered, as the soldiers prepared to separate them forever. "Promise me you'll find happiness somewhere, even if it can't be with me." Marcus pulled her into his arms, holding her tight against his chest, as if he could somehow absorb her into his very soul. For this one perfect moment, they were together, their love finally spoken and acknowledged. "I promise," he said against her hair. "But know this, Lydia, you are my heart. Without you, I am only surviving, not truly living. Whatever happiness I find will always be incomplete." When they finally broke apart, both were crying openly, their tears mingling as Marcus kissed her forehead with infinite tenderness. The tribune cleared his throat uncomfortably. "It's time." As Marcus was led away toward the city gates and exile, Lydia called out one final time. "Remember me," she cried, her voice carrying across the morning air. "Whatever happens, remember that someone loved you enough to set you free." Marcus turned back, his dark eyes burning with love and loss. He touched his heart, then extended his hand toward her. The same gesture of gratitude he had made so many times in the healing chambers, but now it meant so much more. Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowds at the city gates, carrying her love with him into exile and uncertainty. Lydia was escorted back to Valerius's villa, where she would spend the rest of her days as a caged bird, whose song could heal the sick. But she had saved the man she loved, and that knowledge would sustain her through all the dark years ahead. Marcus traveled from Rome, eventually finding work as a healer himself in a distant province, using the medical knowledge he had absorbed from years of watching Lydia work. He never married, never loved another, but he lived free and found peace in helping others, as she had helped him. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind carried the scent of healing herbs, he would close his eyes and remember a green-eyed healer whose gentle touch had saved more than his body. It had saved his soul. Years later, when travelers brought news that Senator Valerius had died and his household disbanded, Marcus began the long journey back toward Rome. But when he reached the city, he learned that Lydia had vanished the day after her captor's death, disappearing into the world like morning mist. Some said she had died of grief. Others claimed she had found her way to the healing temples of Egypt or Greece. But Marcus chose to believe that somewhere in the vast world she was alive and free, using her gift to heal those in need. And on certain nights when the moon was bright and the wind carried whispers of distant voices, he imagined he could hear her calling his name across the darkness, reminding him that love, true love, never truly dies. It simply waits, patient as stone, strong as steel, for the day when two hearts might find each other again. The silent death had spoken at last, and his words had been of love. It was enough. It had to be enough.